I want to move ahead to talking about the marketing equation. And this is probably the most significant thing that I'm going to share with you today, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on it. Because what I hope to convince you of is that marketing is more science than it is art. Marketing is a quantitative process more than a qualitative. Not to say that you don't want to have visually appealing ads. Not to say that you don't want to have copy that resonates with your people, but you really want to focus on a methodical step-by-step process in all of your marketing. And that's called the marketing equation. Before we do that, I have to do a little marketing psychology 101. So, again, I'm going to confirm that I never studied art. Okay, this is your brain, or my rendition of what a brain might look like. This is a tremendous oversimplification. But if you talk to the psychologists, they will tell you that there are basically two mindsets, two ways that we go through our day, two ways that our mind is working. One is called alpha state, and the other is called beta state. And again, an oversimplification is alpha state is what most of us live in most of the time. Our minds are not really fully engaged in any one thing. Just like some of you are listening to me right now, others are thinking about, geez, how long is it till we have lunch? How far away am I going to have to go to get lunch? What am I going to have to do when I get home tonight? Oh, it's Friday night finally. Our minds are bouncing around in a lot of different areas. Most of our day is directed by our subconscious mind, just kind of keeping us on track as we're in an alpha state. Think about when you drove to this meeting this morning. I bet there's not one in the room who could tell me how many stoplights you had to stop at on your way to the meeting this morning. It's because that's not something that's really forefront in our mind. That's the sort of thing we can deal with when we're in an alpha state. Now, what takes us to a beta state? Well, one thing is fear. If we were driving to the meeting this morning and you heard the red lights and sirens of an ambulance coming up behind you, that would immediately put you into a beta state, and you would be looking around, where is that noise coming from? What do I need to do to protect myself from that? If you go to a scary movie, before the guy in the mask jumps out of the closet at the young co-ed, the music is going to build to a crescendo. And your mind is focused on that music, and you're kind of going from alpha state to beta state because you know something scary is coming and you want to be ready for it. Now, the part of your brain that takes you from alpha to beta is called the reticular activator. R-E-T-I-C-U-L-A-R. Spelling and penmanship were not strong suits for me either. And you can look this up. This is really a physical location in your brain. And your reticular activator is constantly in sync with your subconscious mind. And when that reticular activator sees something out in your environment that it knows is important to your subconscious mind, it snaps you from alpha to beta. Okay? You're sitting on the sofa, it's a Saturday afternoon, you're kind of relaxing, you got the TV on in the background, and let's say you're a football fan. Out of the corner of your eye, you see Peyton Manning. Ah, Peyton Manning, all-star quarterback, Denver Bronco. I like football, I like the Broncos. You go from alpha state, being half asleep, to beta, focused on the TV. After about 15 seconds, you realize that it's a Buick commercial, and Peyton is driving a Buick and talking to the OnStar lady, and you kind of shake your head and goes, yeah, okay, he's not going to be throwing a football or telling me anything interesting about the Broncos. It's that silly Buick commercial, and we know that a guy that makes bazillions of dollars like Peyton Manning is probably not driving a Buick Regal. Okay? He may have one in the garage because it's part of his contract with Buick, but they gave it to him. He didn't go out and buy a Buick Regal. Think back to the conversation we had a couple minutes ago about John Smith and hot buttons. Remember, we talked about We want to address our marketing to John Smith's hot buttons. Okay? It's the reticular activator that stimulates our brain when we see a hot button that is relevant to us. So your marketing then needs to be focused on taking your prospect from the alpha state that we spend most of our day in to a beta state where they're fully engaged with your marketing piece. And how do we do that? We do that by focusing on your prospect's hot buttons. Okay. I'm sure you didn't need to write this drawing down. But the way that we take people through that process is through the marketing equation. So let me talk about the 4 components of the marketing equation. First is interrupt. Interrupt. Getting your qualified prospects to pay attention to your marketing. It is hot button based. So, if a hot button for a young woman looking to find a bridal dress is a particular designer, and in the headline of one of your ads you mention that designer's name, is that going to take that young prospect from an alpha state to a beta state and cause her to read more of your ad? Yeah, because it hit one of her hot buttons. Okay? So the interrupt portion of your ad, another way to think of that is the headline or the subject line of your email. That interrupt portion needs to be tied to one of the hot buttons that John Smith told you was important to them as they went through the process. Now, let me talk about the danger of a false beta. The example I just gave of Peyton Manning. After you watch Peyton driving the Buick for a few seconds, you realize that it's the Buick commercial. That's a false beta for a person that is a big football fan, a Peyton Manning fan, or a Denver Bronco fan, because those things that are important to you are not going to be addressed in that commercial. Okay? What are some other examples of false betas? Animals. Almost everybody loves puppies. I can't imagine somebody who wouldn't like a puppy, but I understand there are people who don't like puppies. So if you put a puppy in your ad, but you're not in a business that's related to puppies, that's a false beta, because somebody's going to stop and look at your ad, oh, look at the cute puppy, and then realize that you're selling computer software. What's the puppy got to do with computer software? Nothing. It's a false beta, and they move right on. Sex is a false beta. I mean, unless you're Hugh Hefner. Or you own a Hooters franchise, okay? Because what you do is you interrupt people, but the interrupt is not relevant to what your product or service is. It's a false beta. So you have to be really careful in your headlines or in the subject line of your email that the interrupt, that the hot button based interrupt is congruent with your product. Okay, let's move on. Step 2 in the marketing equation is engage. Engage. What you're telling your prospect is that there is information that's forthcoming in this advertisement that will help them in their decision-making process. I got your attention. I took you from alpha to beta. Now I want you to know that if you continue to stay with me, I'm going to answer some of your questions. So the engage is usually a sub-headline. The third part, educate. Educate is where you identify the important issues for a prospect and demonstrate how you solve them. So to educate, you demonstrate that you understand the questions that are in the mind of your prospect and you answer those questions. For our CPA that's in the group, if I'm going to be a CPA specializing in realtors, in my marketing to those realtors, I want to demonstrate that I understand the three most important tax problems that a realtor can incur and how I help them avoid those problems. Now, if I'm a realtor, that's really relevant to me. I don't have time to deal with the IRS, and I understand they're really nasty. So I want to make sure I don't have to have the opportunity to go in for an audit. So if you can help me avoid that, then that's something that is of definite interest to me. As opposed to, I'm a CPA, I've been in business for 37 years, I went to a really good school back in the old days, and I take all my continuing ed. My response to that is going to be, well, duh. Of course you take your continuing ed. You're required to keep your license. That doesn't say anything to me. What are you going to do for me? So the educate component of your marketing piece is, what are the questions that are in the minds of your prospects, and how do I address those questions? The final piece is the offer. The offer. What is a low-risk way that I can give you as the prospect the opportunity to take the next step in the educational spectrum? If I've just stepped onto the educational spectrum and I'm at a level 4, what are you going to do to help me move to level 5? Remember the example I gave earlier where I introduced myself to the young lady from the bridal shop and said, here's my business, by the way, here's a contract, I want you to sign it so we can do business right away. That's never going to work. But if I say to her, here's my business and I want you to learn something about how I can help people who are starting a bridal shop, would you like to download this free report from my website? Well, that's something that she can do in the privacy of her own home office at any time of the day, and she doesn't have to talk to me on the phone. Okay? Because people don't want to talk to salespeople. Okay? Not in the early stages of the process. So the offer component is really important, and every marketing piece you do needs to have an offer. A low-risk way that allows your prospect to take the next step in the buying process. What that does is it makes your prospect feel like they're in charge. Every marketing piece you do, whether it's an advertisement in the paper, it's your trifold brochure that you have sitting in a little plastic case on the counter in your retail store, it's the home page of your website, everything that you do needs to follow the marketing equation. You need to have an effective interrupt that takes your prospect from alpha state to beta mode. It needs to immediately follow that interrupt with a relevant engagement statement that says, if you continue to be involved in this marketing piece with me, I'm going to answer some of your questions. The education component is where you specify what the question is and how you answer it. And then the offer is a low-risk way for them to take the next step. Now, think about this for a minute. That's a lot of content to put into an ad. Are those ads going to be really pretty? Are they going to have a neat picture of a puppy or a couple silhouetted by a sunset in the background? Probably not. Is that puppy or that couple silhouetted in the sunset relevant to your business? If it is, maybe it's an effective interrupt. But if it's just there so you have a pretty ad, it does you no good. And marketing's expensive. You know, if you're going to spend $1,000 to put an ad in a magazine, if you go to Albuquerque, the magazine, and want one of those really nice, glossy, slick 4-color ads, and it's going to cost you $1,000 to put it in there for a month, wouldn't you like to have something that's effective, something that's going to make a person take the next step with you, as opposed to something that you can take to your friends and say, look at this really cool ad that I did, and it only cost me $1,000, and nothing happened as a result of it, but isn't it a cool ad? We can't afford that. So you want to follow the marketing equation.